Hello and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to customize this rainbow high doll and make her into a Ren-Fair inspired doll. Now, sadly this was the only type rainbow high that I could find at the store, and it's this like beach-esque one. And these have one limitation, and that is that they don't have all the joinery that most other rainbow highs have. So besides the head being able to move and the hips and shoulders, the rest of the articulation is missing. Now, it will not be a problem for this customization since I'm not planning to modify the body, which means that later I can just swap out bodies, but for now I'm stuck with this one. Anyways, let's actually unbox this, and this was an experience. This doll was in its packaging, it was like really secure. But I'm happy to see that the cardboard on the back they used I can easily reuse for some other projects, because it has a nice pattern and it's nice and sturdy. But all of these plastic jibby things they put on the back, the like holder clamp things, were like so in there I had to like get them out of the hair, and also there was a smudge on the nose which luckily I could just wipe away. She wears a bathing suit, and also her hair is like pretty crusty, so I will have to wash that probably multiple times to get that out. I think this like bathing towel is meant to like be made into an outfit or something. I looked into the instructions and they say you can make 10 plus outfits with them, but I noticed for half of them this towel is just plainly too small. Although it would, I guess, work with like normal beach towels or like a larger size fabric, but with the one they provided it definitely doesn't work too much. Also my tiny baggie has like a cut off edge there, so that wasn't too nice. And yeah, the glasses, they kind of fit behind the ears, but the nose part isn't really well sculpted for it. And we get some shoes, so very simple. Also, I think the reason why it doesn't have any joints is probably because this is meant to be played with in like the bathtub or like at the beach or something. And if you get any kind of sand in the joints or like play in the water with it, they might seize up. The only thing they kept consistent so far with these dolls is that with the shoes on, they stand on their own. This is actually the first one that I did get that didn't have a full-on stand. But that's totally fine since it's meant to like launch on the beach, and I do also have stands myself. One thing I noticed, there were random plastic bits sticking out of her head, and these were never connected to anything. There was just like 3 random ones stuck in her skull, even though they were never attached, so I had to cut them off because they were pretty sharp edged. But now that I've actually unboxed it, let's start with the customization. And the first step is to give her a, well, brain surgery. So I'm using a pretty sharp knife. Always make sure that I'm cutting away from myself, and I'm very careful because this vinyl is pretty hard. I could have softened it, but I feared that it might then get so soft that when I push the knife in I might like slip and reach the plugs. So I just basically separated her hair. I did wash it for the first time here, but it's still pretty crusty. I just gave it a wash with a very neutral soap for the first one, and it was just so I can like braid it to the side. But after I have the slit, it is time to take off the head, and for that she gets a hot water bath just with some boiling water from the kettle. I'm carefully using a towel and pulling the body off. Note that this vinyl gets very hot when you do that, so always be careful. I tried to then push out the eyes, which went really easy, and what I'm gonna do with these is I'm gonna cast them. So I removed the like back sprue kind of things, and I also pulled off the eyelashes. And then I just sanded it flat so I can put it into a mold, and then I could basically like prepare a mold just with some basic stuff, so some tape to hold them in place and a like barrier to hold the silicone in. In this case I just use a like paper cup kind of thing, and I'm just making sure the eyes are clean, and then I'm slowly pouring in the silicone. And this is just a standard 2-part silicone that I dyed blue, and that is just so I can see, because I need to do clear pours in this. And if it was the normal silicone color, this is pretty translucent. I just wanted to have a bit of contrast to like see what I'm doing. And this type of silicone I use is like a shore hardness like 30 or something, so it cures pretty quick. And it should be ready in like about 2 hours or so to be used, but I like to let it sit a little bit longer. But let's actually get to the face up. Now I'm using acetone here, and I also noticed on the back of the doll there's a little bit of writing, and it seems like the plastic they use for the dolls doesn't like acetone because it definitely gave it a bit of a weird texture, but I managed to like sand it off with a fine sanding sponge, so it was fine. But beware, just use acetone on the vinyl face, don't use it on the doll body, it just, yeah, dissolves the plastic. But I got the writing off, it was like the rainbow high like writing stuff. Getting all the colors out of the nooks and crannies took a little while, and I used a toothpick and just a paper towel that was soaked in the acetone, but after some diligent work I got it off. The worst actually to get off was the glitter that they used on her face. Any kind of glitter paint that they put on doll faces is always the hardest to remove, and it's really hard to sometimes get all the glitter remnants off at all. I found glitter like so much after this on her face still that I had to like scrape off in between layers of sealant, which is a shame, but it sadly happens, but luckily it isn't too obvious. So I gave her a spray coat of matte UV varnish. The one I'm using I'm not gonna list because it like the first few sprays of it were actually matte, and then it suddenly started getting shiny for some weird reason. I shook the spray bottle pretty well, but I think the product just, I don't know. It's not really that matte, but for starting off this customization it actually worked. So I'm just layering on some, these are aquarelle or like watercolor pencils, and I'm just layering them on, basically tracing out where all the stuff goes, and this helps to like refine shapes later. And I'm just going around the eyes and the eyebrows with like light shades of the colors that I'm actually planning on using, and then I'm using 2 tones of red for the lips just to get the outline and shade them. A good thing about these pens, I'm using the Faber-Castell ones by the way, is that you can actually dissolve them with water, so to get more opaque colors later you can just use a brush and like a little bit of water and then apply them. But for now, for the base coat and getting the outline as I wanted this, like using the actual pen is perfect. I'm also using some pastel chalk just to give her a little bit of blushing, mainly on her cheeks, but also a little bit on her nose and her forehead, just to make her look a bit more alive. And then it's time to head in with another coat of varnish, and now I can refine the shape. So I'm starting out with the eyebrows, and I really sharpened my pencil here, and I'm just going in drawing really fine lines to get like the defined single eyebrow hair look. Now this may need some layers for it to actually look like something, but in this case it actually, even with the first layer, looked pretty well. Also intensify the blush a bit, like actually building up the blush and all that to the colors works best in between layers, so every time I add a layer I just, you know, spray the sealant in between, and then I can paint on another layer, and this will just help build up the color slowly. At first I wanted to go with like her showing a little bit of her teeth while smiling, but in the end I didn't really like it, so I fixed that and just painted over it. And also to darken up like all the lines, basically as I said what I'm doing, I'm just using a little bit of water, actually like activating the nibs of the pencils. What is really good with these watercolor pencils is that if you have broken off nibs, which I had a lot with some of these sadly, and that's because they're so soft, you can just basically keep them and still paint with them with the brushes. Since, you know, you can actually make them into basically watercolor instead of just using them as pencils. So don't throw away the broken ones. They are not like colored pencil that are basically unusable with this. You can always reactivate. Now when I painted the lips, I decided I wanted to smile a little, so I increased the like lines towards her cheek, a little bit upwards, and I went in with a gradient of like a darker red and a lighter red on the lips, just to give it a bit more like life and a bit more variation. And once I was finished with the face up, I gave it 2 more coats of the varnish, and I also added another matte varnish that I just sprayed with my airbrush. That one is not really protective, it's just an acrylic matte varnish, but it gives it this matte look. So yeah, I needed the other varnish to like seal in the face paint, and this one just to mattify it. And then I added some gloss on the lips. And of course she needs some eyelashes, so I'm just using some cheap fake eyelashes and some Yoo-hoo glue. And this one is just like basically sticking it on the inside, since this doll has like high cavities more or less, which is why I like the Rainbow High dolls. You can just stick it on top of them and it will hold pretty well. You don't have to worry about getting glue anywhere or having to fake off a lash line from the like part that you glue them onto and all that stuff. Now at this point the eye mold were actually finished. Now there's gonna be a little bit of a line, and that's just because the eyes are actually 2 parts with a groove, but that line is gonna help me separate the clear coat from the white background later. So all I'm doing is I'm using a pipette and trickling in just about the same amount of clear in each, and that's just gonna be the flat base where I can put the eye part later. Now, once the resin is cured, you could paint the eye part on it directly, but I found it's a little bit easier to paint it on paper. Anyway, that's off to curing, so now we can make some patterns for her clothes. I don't have any sacrificial dolls, since I only ever had 2 Rainbow Highs that I both customized, you know, this one included. So I'm just using her body to make a pattern, which should work all the same. You just have to be careful that you don't like scratch the doll or anything, or like paint on it. But I'm just using the same method you can use on yourself actually. I'm just using tape strips and some cling film, wrapping the cling film up tightly and then using the tape strips to like in small strips cover her body. And using these like small strips, you can use even thinner strips if you want more detailed like body shape replications, which I didn't need here. It just helps keep the body shape, and then I'm tracing on the basic pattern. Now I only need to do this once because all the clothing pieces I'm planning on doing will hold the same pattern, which is nice. But if you do like different variations or want to make pants or anything, this actually works really well too. You just may have to, you know, do multiple passes to actually make your pattern pieces. And then I'm just carefully cutting them off along the lines that I traced, and afterwards I'm just going to trace this on some paper just to make it easier for myself to work with, because this is very much so a weak material, and if I was traced from this it wouldn't really work. Now it did actually cut out a reverse dart kind of situation on the sides because of the body shape of the doll, but it worked out really well. And then I cut out my first type of pattern pieces out of this white fabric. This is supposed to be like a blouse, underblouse kind of thing. And I'm just using some phrase check on the parts that would usually be hemmed, just because this is a very like fine doll work. It's a small doll and I don't really want to have the hemline, so I'm just using this freight check. This is from Prim, by the way. It like kind of is like when you get super glue on fabric, just that it doesn't leave the like crustiness behind and like mostly dries absolutely clear, so it definitely helps keeping the threads together, which is why I like it. And then I'm sewing this first the shoulders together, then I'm sewing on the reverse darts, and then I'm adding the like shoulder pieces or the arm sleeve pieces around the shoulders before sewing in the entire sides. And then I'm actually done, and I'm turning it inside out. Now, if you want to, you can increase the pattern and use Velcro. I usually like to keep my clothes on the doll, so I'm gonna just cut a slit later and sew that in. But that is a decision of the doll maker. Now the next part was to make a skirt, and I found this fabric of an old blouse of mine, and it had like these ruffles around the arms which have already elastics in them, so it makes it really easy to like use it. And they also had a hem edge, so I just sewed these two parts together and I had a very simple skirt. Now next up I wanted to make a like corset type situation, so I'm just using some faux leather and I'm tracing out the pattern directly, since this is a pretty simple shape and I shouldn't need a pattern. If you don't feel as confident, then it may actually be good to like get a pattern out, but I found working from the doll is pretty easy in this case. And since I have sewn clothes for myself also and all that, I kind of halfway know how these kind of things work, so that also helps and makes it a bit easier. But this one I'm just gonna sew in like a crisscross pattern together and add some decoration lines, and I had to do that off camera because I ran out of battery. But here you can see the finished piece. And this corset doesn't have any boning, which the doll doesn't need since it keeps its shape, and it's just sewn in the back. Next up I also made a belt with the same kind of pleather, just a different color, and I'm just basically using two loops. These are decorational, these are not functional. I'm going to sew this buckle together, but if you want to, you can actually make functional belts totally fine. I just want it to look like a nice belt. I don't need it to be removable. Some dolls stuff I like to make removable, but I also knew that this one I would likely just add stuff onto and not really take it apart, so I just basically glued the buckle a bit, sewed it together, and yeah, the two decorational loops are not gonna hold it, but they're gonna look nice, hopefully. Another thing I wanted to make is a pouch, just for the belt. Also off camera I made basically with the same pattern another like overdress in a green fabric. I did actually take pictures, but yeah, again, as it always is when you record long videos, some parts may get lost, and this was actually I think like 7 hours of editing footage, so I had to cut it down a little bit also. But yeah, I just traced out a simple pouch, not even making a pattern, and then I'm just sewing the edges together. Now the one thing you need to pay attention to with this kind of pleather is it's very thin. So when you like have a needle and you sew close to the edge for like fine and detail work, it may actually rip through. So I always had to be very careful, use a very sharp needle. But in the end it worked out pretty well. I have like 1 or 2 spots at the end where it like kind of cut through the pleather here, but it wasn't really noticeable at all, and it didn't really matter since there was no gaps. So I just used some glue from the inside and fixed it that way. But yeah, all I did was basically just go from the outside, very simple stitches, sew them together, and then I'm making a knot and I'm actually using some glue just to seal that in. And with that, the pouch is actually practically done. I'm also cutting in like 2 slits in the back just with scissor, and that is just to hold it on the belt. I could have made like an extra belt loop on the back, but with this kind of material I felt like it wasn't as sturdy, so I just cut into slits since I'm not really planning on like taking it apart, and actually this bag will be a non-usable. Now if I wanted to, again, I could have made a clasp, but I didn't really know what I want to put into this bag, and I thought, you know, just holding it closed so it keeps its shape, it's probably more useful than having it reopenable and deal with it. So all I did was basically I like sewed it shut, and then later on I'm going to add some decorations. Next up was the part I struggled with the most, and that was not because shoes are hard to make. Actually, if you have the right fabrics, shoes aren't that bad. It was more because I wanted to use pleather, which is a bit too thick for this to work well. So I'm actually using the shoe bases we already have, and I'm using the same like basic pattern making thing with the tape. This time I ran out of cling film, so I actually had to just tape it on, but I used a very weak tape, so it was fine. I just really had to be careful to not cut at all, but I'm basically just putting the pattern on, tracing it out, and then I'm cutting it off, and again, this can just be mirrored for the other side. And since I already had the shoe base, I didn't really have to worry about making one, but even that would be pretty easy with some watercolor. I've actually done it before. So I'm just basically carefully cutting around the shoe base and then carefully also cutting out the pattern before tracing it onto pleather. Now, pleather is not really malleable, it's not as soft as other fabrics. With other fabrics, this pattern would have probably worked a bit more snugly, like a bit more stretchy fabrics. But this pleather is not stretchy at all. So it will not conform to the shapes as well as I hope to, and I also had to piece more pieces together, because although this pattern piece should have fit perfectly, it didn't really, so I basically struggled a little bit with that. But in the end it was fine. I managed to piece the shoes together. I just, had to work on them for a bit longer than I wanted to, and I'm not gonna totally record all the steps. It's mainly just the thing I struggled most with, but that I guess happens when it comes to these kind of patterns. I actually decided to halve this pattern and just mirror it myself because it wasn't very even on both sides, but that worked out really well. But yeah, if you're making shoes like this, make sure you use a stretchier fabric. But using actually the base of these shoes as a base for the other shoes, that's a good tip. It works really well. The gummy plastic they use is so soft you can just cut off the buckle type thing. And actually later on I decided I didn't want to make heels, so I also cut off the heels, which was super simple. Just be careful that you not slip, but as you can see I had to alter these shoes a lot of times, and because of the non-stretch of the fabric I had to cut in some lines. I think decorational wise these shoes turned out pretty well on the top. It is just that the lines around the shoe base are a bit more uneven than I like them to be, which I guess happens because, as I said, this pleather is a bit more sturdy and not as movable. Now, in between waiting for these shoes to dry, I actually also traced out the eyes and used just some colored pencil to get the right eye colors and the right eye markings. I went in with a light brown and some different tones of green and some acrylic in the middle just to have the black be really vibrant, and size wise I used the original eyes as an inspiration, although mine are probably gonna be a little bit smaller iris wise, but that's okay. And then to actually get the slightly dark on the outside, I could have used a black, but I didn't want the eyes to be as potently black on the outside, so I just used this colored pencil in a dark black, and it's gonna be the outside line. I'm not gonna darken anything, and I just hope it doesn't look like the eyes have no life in them since it's missing the rim, but you can totally after cutting out paint the rim if you don't feel comfortable. But I think overall these turned out pretty nice. So I'm happy with them, and I like the colors. I just needed to carefully trim them to size and then round them off, and I also added eye shines. Now I actually went with white that is not as pure white, because I thought it would fit the darker medieval-esque vibes a bit more that I wanted to go with, but I think in the end I maybe would have preferred to use a bit more of a potent white for eye shines. Either way, with that finished, I mix up a tiny bit of clear resin and I'm adding in these parts of the eyes. I marked where there's up since I painted some shading in there just to have direction, so I made some little markings on the back to mark which way they're facing, and then I'm adding the resin in carefully and positioning them and letting this cure. They're getting a finer coat on the back, but I didn't want it to run in front of the coloration and ruin this piece, so I'm just doing small layers. This will take, of course, a bit longer in between curing, but it should actually work out better and not mix the colors. Next up, I went in with her hair, and I'm just doing some simple braids on the sides, and I'm also doing some simple braids on the back. And I'm actually doing this after I've watched it again, and as you can see, I'm using some strands to just wrap around with some glue to like fasten it. I didn't want to use any like rubber bands or anything like visible. Like maybe in the future I will pick up some pearls or something that I can use as decoration, but it didn't feel like it here, so I just went in with the just normal braids and then the glue. Now I know that I will not change this part of the hair anymore. I might change the back part, but even then you know, it should be pretty easy to still get the glue out. But I'm just using some fine braids, and then I wanted to separate out some of the sides and just braid them in the back. And this will also help to like get rid of the cut I made in the back, since I don't plan to close it in case I ever want to change the eyes. So this like back braid will help with that. And I struggled a little bit to get it more towards the back, so it sits a bit higher, but I still think it looks really cute. And actually with it sitting a bit higher, it covers the back cut perfectly, which is nice. Now the easiest way I found to braid these is to have your doll like sit on something, or like clamp it in between your knees or something to hold it, which I didn't really have the option here, but I still think it works out pretty well, and I'm pretty happy with her hair. I decided to go with the original hair because I really like the color, and once I washed it I actually used some neutral dish soap to get out all the stuff. It like was super soft. It may just maybe need a bit of a hair straightening at some point, because I think it will get pretty fluffy now that all the product is out, but I wanted chaotic fluffy for her hair. I think that will look really nice. And then of course I needed to work a bit more on her shoes, which was like gluing in another piece to like close them off actually. But I'm also going to lace them up to make them fit, so I'm leaving tiny gaps for the foot to still fit. But basically with that, all I needed to do was like pretty up the soles, which I just used some satin ribbon for, and some glue, and then I'm going to paint the rest. And this is actually where I decided that I don't like the heels. I originally wanted to cover them in some pleather or something, but I didn't really like them. I felt like some boots that, you know, like with the shape they were a bit more straight. I felt like flat boots would fit that more, since I couldn't get the refined foot shape. So I basically just went in with some scissors, cut up the heel, and then I put on a black strip of pleather on the bottom. The sides of this pleather aren't fully black, so I also went in with some acrylic paints later, but with that actually I'm pretty happy with the shoes, and they're pretty much done. They're very simple, but I think they fit the thematic of like Ren-Fair style stuff pretty well, and I think they will fit the outfit really well too. Now the last part of the eyes was actually pouring the white. I'm going to, like in the original they have a little bit of black on the top. I'm going to actually paint that on later, and that is just because it's easier to like not try and pour that just in case it gets on the back. I just want the pure white, so actually using some acrylics later will help with that. And the reason I guess why they have the black is maybe they just look a bit more surprised if they don't. But you know, the original eyes are two parts and I'm pouring them on one part, but I have the groove line which should help me paint the upper part. But overall they turned out pretty nicely. As I said, the white eyeshades could have been a bit more white, I guess, but I still think these look really cute, and they definitely turned out really well. This mold works super well, so I can just use it again and again as long as they don't like change any of the eye shapes. But for now, like the first few series of Rainbow High, they should actually work out. And with that, it was actually time to put the doll together, so I could start sewing on the clothes. Started out with the shoes, and I'm just using some normal sewing thread. and a very fine needle, and I'm going to sew this on directly, trying to like make both sides of the shoes look even. And actually sewing this on will help refine the shape a little bit more, since I can like pull it together a little bit more and like make it conform to the foot shape a little bit. And I think besides obviously the connections between the sole and the shoe itself, these shoes turned out actually really cute. I like the details with like the overlapping lace-up parts. They like really look like they were meant to be, even though it was more of an, you know, pattern didn't fit kind of thing, which I'm really happy about that worked out this way. And they're actually also really easy to put on. Like the only thing that actually holds them in shape are these ribbons, and I just made sure to like tie some nice like little knots on them to secure it. And then I also added some wristbands. Again, I lost the footage of these, but these were basically like a rectangle that I like tapered one side a little bit to help the arm shape, and I'm just sewing them on, one on each side, and these ones I'm also going to knot on. Next up, I put on the shirt, and this one also gets sewn in just with some simple white thread, and this is what I'm basically going to do for most of the clothes except for the skirt, since this one has the rubber band that should actually hold it. And since this one is a lower layer, I'm not really paying attention to how I'm sewing it. This sits underneath the other clothing. Now, one thing I didn't really like is this is a cotton linen blend, and I think I have to like iron it at some point or something, because the sleeves kept turning at the seam line a little bit inside out so that they don't keep their point. But my small sewing iron I don't have here at the moment, so I need to pick that up later. But as you can see, like the seams basically slip up. I then put on the overdress, which, as I said, I didn't show on camera, but it's basically just an elongated version of the shirt, and the skirt. And then I noticed that the white shirt was riding up the entire time, and I struggled so much with it that I decided to basically sew it together around her body too. Now, I could have made it like a bodysuit kind of situation, but I didn't think about it riding up this much. I thought like the skirt would hold it up a little bit more, which it didn't, so I just put several threads around just to keep it from riding up, and then I made like a little tie and just covered it up with the skirt, and this should hold it in place pretty well. And then it was time to sew shut the overdress, and for this one I, as I said, did pay more attention to how I sewed it, because you will be able to see it at least slightly, although it should mainly be covered with the hair. And actually I didn't really like matter that I sometimes stitch through the lower layers a little bit. This is just gonna like keep everything together and in place. Like when I pose her and all that, nothing should like ride up or like that I have to reposition things on her upper body, because everything now is sewn in place in multiple layers. And then lastly, of course, is the corset, which I'm also sewing just directly on her. But this one is gonna get some nice little bow tie details, like just with the ribbon, just tying it up into little bows in the end, just to make it look like it's actually lace. And I'm making sure to go in a very fine zigzag, kind of like I did with the shoes and the wrist protection stuff, since like this is an actual detail that will be seen and is supposed to be there. And as you can see, I'm like tightening as I go, and I'm really careful to like not rip the platter, but of course one of the edges slipped slightly, but that is okay. I just like started the thread a little bit higher for the next row, and it worked out pretty well. You cannot even really tell that there's a rip in there, since I so close to the edge that it just looks like it's sitting perfectly together again. So luckily not too much of a problem, but definitely something that like pleather is not good for if it like needs to hold a lot of strength or weight. So like these tensioning sutures, basically they are a bit too much for it, so I needed to be very careful to not rip everything. I actually put the little side backpack on the belt, just basically slid it on there, and then I used some glue and just a rhinestone to like embellish the backpack to like cover up the stitching I did. And this one is also gonna be stitched in place. I made the belt purposely a bit longer, so I just wrapped it around 1.5 times and then sewed in the back where you will not really be able to see it, but it should give a nice like kind of double belt effect without actually being a double belt, and you know, just very simple, and it should hold the belt in place pretty well. So what I did was basically I just knotted it on one side and then hit the knot in the back and made it a bit less visible than most of the other seams. And yeah, with that all of the accessories are done. The only thing I wanted to change up was her hairline. Now, because I braided her hair back, the hairline was pretty much visible, so I wanted to like draw on some frizzy hairs that would cover this up, and I tried to go with her temples. I first wanted to make curls, but they didn't really look well, so I'm gonna wipe them off later. This acrylic paint takes a little while to dry, so just some water before I actually seal it works really well. And I'm using a really fine nail art brush, and this gives me the like sharp wispy lines that I'm going for. I'm starting out with this darkest shade, which I tried to mimic the hair color with, and then I'm going in with like lighter and lighter shades. I think I went over it like 3 times with different shades, and this is actually where I decided to remove the temples. I just basically went in with a towel with some water and rubbed it off. And then I went in to like try and make the frizz look a bit more normal and like blend in with the hair. And this worked super well. I'm really happy with it. It works definitely well. I saw a lot of people like make just a couple strands of frizz, but I really like the fine detail that I got for her. And with that, the doll is done. And I have to say, I'm really happy. She's very simple, but she's rocking that layered look. Actually, when she stands, you cannot really see the sole, so her shoes look really good also, although they're now covered up by the skirt. I may want to steam the skirt at some point, because the folds it like makes aren't really that fine, they don't really fit at all. But overall, I think she turned out super lovely. Her simple face paint just looks really cute overall, and it looks like really lively, but that's what I wanted to go for. Very simple, more natural, besides maybe the red lips, but yeah. And I'm really happy how the eyes turned out with the pour. I wasn't sure how it would turn out with the paper in there and all that, but with the clear coats first and then just embedding the paper in there, it worked super well. I actually did use some sturdier watercolor paper, and I just used some normal colored pencils to draw it, and it held up pretty well. There was no like fading, no washing of the colors, and I didn't even seal it, which is really nice, because I know that some color pencil will like can dissolve in resin. This one luckily didn't, so I didn't have to redo the eyes. And I absolutely have to say I love how the clothing and the accessories turned out. Like, it was so much work to like get the corset lines sewn in, the decorative ones, but I think it was worth it all along. I actually did sew all the clothes by hand, which meant that I spent a couple hours on this, which is why I didn't film it. But I think that also was worth it. You can of course go in with a sewing machine, but for these tiny scale things I like to sew per hand just to have a bit more of control over where I'm sewing. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what your thoughts of this doll are. Do you like it, and would you change anything that I made for her? She's gonna hopefully live a happy long life on my shelves, and the only thing I may do, as I said, may at one point change up the hair or the eye colors. And of course maybe the body if I ever decide to like make her movable. Also, I'm sorry for my raspy voice in between several of the voiceovers coming up and previous ones, and of course also this one. It is allergy season, and this year it's pretty bad around here, so it obviously affects my voice a little bit. Anyways, I hope you have a great day. See you next time. Bye bye!